90 miles. That is all the water separating the United States from one of its longest standing adversaries, Cuba, the largest island in the Caribbean, sitting at the crossroads of the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Caribbean Sea. It has been a thorn in Washington's side for over 6 decades, and right now, that tension is reaching a new boiling point. 5 months ago, US forces stormed into Caracas and captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Almost immediately after, US President Donald Trump cut off Venezuelan oil deliveries to Cuba and pressured Mexico, which had become the island's leading fuel supplier, to do the same. Cuba was left with almost nothing coming in. And the message coming out of Washington has been mixed. On the one hand, Trump is openly threatening a takeover, while on the other, the US State Department has offered a $100 million aid package if Cuba agrees to make reforms. But one thing is becoming harder to ignore. The US is starting to settle into a pattern that looks very similar to what came before the operation against Maduro.
We have some very good plans for Cuba. I think, we have to get rid of the regime was very tough, very nasty. The difference is now they don't have money coming in. They had a lot of money coming in from Venezuela. They don't have any money coming. They had oil coming in. They had money coming in. But we're going to take care of Cuba.
People across Cuba face prolonged power blackouts, in some places up to 20 hours a day, along with acute shortages of food, medicine, and other basic goods. Neighborhoods in Havana have been shrouded in darkness, with residents banging pots in the streets to protest the outages. The fuel blockade is the key driver. Without oil coming in, power stations cannot run. Without power, hospitals struggle, farms cannot irrigate, and what little remains of the tourism industry comes to a halt. Cuba welcomed 4.7 million visitors in 2018, its peak year. By 2025, that number had fallen to under 2 million. Extreme poverty now affects 89% of the population, and 7 in 10 Cubans have had to skip meals because they simply do not have the resources. The economy has contracted by roughly 15% since 2020, and independent forecasters project a further contraction of around 7% in 2026, the third consecutive year of decline. Cuba's GDP per capita is the lowest in all of Latin America and the Caribbean. Foreign airlines, hotel companies, and shipping firms are pulling out as US sanctions make doing business on the island too risky. Cuba has even suspended Visa and MasterCard transactions. Official Cuban figures show the country's population has declined by more than 13% between 2015 and 2025. This is due to a massive exodus from the country. At the center of Washington's pressure campaign is one man, Raul Castro. Now 95 years old, Raul fought alongside his older brother Fidel Castro in the 1959 guerrilla war that toppled a US-backed government and brought the Castros to power. He later served as Cuba's president and defense minister, and while he no longer holds an official title, he remains a powerful behind-the-scenes force on the island. The Trump administration recently unsealed a formal indictment against him, charging him with murder in connection with the 1996 shooting down of 2 civilian planes operated by a Cuban exile group. It is exactly the kind of legal framing Washington used before it went into Venezuela to grab Maduro. The message was not subtle. A similar legal justification was used then to argue that Maduro's capture represented law enforcement, not a foreign military intervention. To reinforce the point, CIA Director John Ratcliffe flew to Cuba for talks and reportedly brought along a paramilitary officer who had been involved in capturing Maduro. It was a deliberate signal of what could come if negotiations go nowhere. Fresh sanctions have since been placed not just on Raul Castro, but on his son, his grandson, Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel, and Diaz-Canel's immediate family. The military conglomerate that controls much of Cuba's economy, known as Gaza, has also been targeted. Alongside the economic pressure, there is military buildup. The USS Nimitz carrier strike group entered the Caribbean in May. Over 1,300 Marines of the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit are set to replace forces that have been stationed in the region since January. US surveillance flights over Cuba have increased significantly. So what could the US actually do? Analysts have mapped out several possibilities, each with its own logic and its own risks. The most straightforward option is a continuation of the current strategy. Keep the fuel blockade in place and let Cuba's deteriorating economy do the work. Cuba has essentially no navy and very few friends capable of breaking it. Russia did manage to deliver one oil shipment in March, but a second Cuba-bound tanker reportedly turned back. This suggests even Moscow may be reaching the limits of how far it can push back against Washington in this standoff. The second scenario involves a special forces operation. A direct attempt to capture or kill senior Cuban leadership, most likely Raul Castro or President Diaz-Canel, mirroring what was done in Caracas. The legal groundwork through the indictment is already in place. But analysts caution that Cuba is not Venezuela. The Cuban Communist Party is far more deeply institutionalized than Venezuela's government ever was. Removing one figure from the top is unlikely to bring the whole system down. If anything, history suggests the hardline elements, the military, the intelligence services, the party apparatus would close ranks and dig in. A third possibility is a limited air offensive, like targeted strikes against Cuban military infrastructure and intelligence facilities to degrade the regime's capacity and pressure it into accepting major changes. With the Nimitz in the region and Cuba's air defenses having been neglected for decades, the US has the capability to execute this. But airstrikes alone have rarely toppled governments, and Cuba would be no exception.
It sort of collapsed, and we're going to handle that as soon as we've finished. I like to do one thing at a time, and we'll take care of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And as soon as that's done on our way back, we'll just make a little brief stopover.
Mr. President.
We'll take care of it. We want to help them out.
The US does have real strategic interests at stake here. Cuba serves as a base for Chinese intelligence operations. It has reportedly sent mercenaries to support Russia in Ukraine. Washington wants to open up the Cuban economy and create a political path for the millions of Cubans who have already voted with their feet and left for American shores. But having interests is not the same as having a plan. And that is where the situation becomes genuinely dangerous. Every military option on the table runs into the same wall. The question of what happens next. What is clear is that the Caribbean is entering one of its most volatile periods in decades. That's all in this edition of Connecting the Dots. We'll see you in the next episode with more raging issues. Until then, it's a goodbye from all of us in the Delhi newsroom. This is Munmun Bhattacharya signing off. Take care and stay safe.